So let's talk about this year's Georgia team, because probably the most interesting thing is what didn't happen. Georgia has Carson Beck get hurt in the SEC championship game. Gunner Stockton comes in for him, starts the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame. And then Georgia does not go into the portal and get a quarterback. They roll with Gunner Stockton. How clear was that when last season ended that he was going to be the guy? And what does that situation look like now?
Well, I would like to point out they tried. Fernando Mendoza was very much on the Christmas list. I think it was right around Christmas too. He was very much on the list. They wanted him. They liked him a lot. They were actually in pretty good shape there. But I think ultimately Indiana, and not just Indiana, but all the other schools recruiting him, kind of got into his head and said, hey, they get this, Gunner Stockton kid. If he looks good in the Sugar Bowl, you got no chance. And honestly, I've never been a Gunner guy. Like I'll say that up front, and I think I even told Gunner that when I was interviewing him at the Sugar Bowl. I was like, hey, I've kind of been critical, and I have. Like you hear all these, you guys have covered teams before. You hear great things about players in practice, and then they get a chance to play, and you're just kind of like, man, I don't see it. I don't get it. He comes in the SEC championship game. He didn't light the world on fire. He made one of the ugliest mistakes I think I've ever seen a quarterback make, just by throwing the ball right directly to a Texas guy out of panic. But the one thing that I was impressed with was the way he came in, engineered a touchdown drive, got Georgia the lead. Georgia won that game. And listen, Georgia was a second half team all year. There's odds are if Carson Beck was healthy, they were going to make a run in the second half anyway. But Gunner picked it up and ran with it, and he did a good job. I thought he was a bright spot in the Sugar Bowl. No run game, very poor pass protection with Monroe Freeling beat to death, and Georgia beat to death up front just in general. 7 of their top 9 offensive linemen were dinged up at different points in the year. I thought he actually played well, delivered a good deep ball, pushed the ball downfield, did the same thing in the G-Day game. So I feel a lot better about Gunner than I did, hearing good things about him in practice and not seeing it whenever he got a chance to play. But when you kind of boil it all down, I do think Georgia wanted to bring in some experienced competition with him. If Georgia had 2 Gunner Stocktons, just the exact same guy, I would have no question about their quarterback room. But now they're one snap away from playing somebody who's never played before, and you never want to be in that situation.
Yeah, and also too, you thought that Georgia was much better than you anticipated 2 years ago in Carson Beck's first year as a starter, and I think a lot of that has to do with what we're finding out about Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, right? Like in the NFL, those guys are lighting the world on fire. And last year, I think part of the reason why, at least from my perspective, Jake, that Georgia struggled was that they didn't have any explosive offensive weapons on the outside that you could know for a fact are going to change the game. They went out and they got a few guys this year that might be able to do that. How do you feel about their explosiveness on offense outside of Gunner? And do you think they have a chance to return to being more explosive offensively?
Yeah, I think they definitely got more depth and more guys that are natural for playing their position. I mean, listen, it's not going to go down in any sort of record books, and you're not going to find it in the encyclopedias that they sell going door to door or anything. But man, Ra Thomas getting in trouble and getting kicked off the team prior to the start of the season, combined with Colby Young also getting in trouble and getting basically suspended for the rest of the season, was a dagger for Georgia's receiving corps, because Georgia lost 2 experienced X receivers. Dylan Bell was going to go into the year as kind of the number 3 X receiver. He and Dylan Humphreys. Dylan Bell's an off the line of scrimmage. I don't want to call him a gadget guy, but he's a motion guy. You put him in motion, you fake jet sweeps to him, you throw him some screens, you push the ball downfield. He had to play X, and X is kind of your pure wide receiver position. That's your route runner, third down guy, commands respect from the defense. If you don't have a good X receiver, a strong X receiver, then you're not gonna be a very balanced receiving core. And I think that hurt Georgia. Well, now they've got Colby Young back. They've got Noah Thomas. They've got a couple of freshmen that I think are way more capable of playing that specific spot than a guy like Dylan Bell, who is a catch and run guy. So, now Dylan Bell can kind of slide to the slot. He can play, he can play flanker. He can play running back some. Like, he can move around. And I think that just makes Georgia's offense better. And you still have London Humphreys, and you have the 2 freshmen, C.J. Wiley and Talon Taylor. You got a healthy tight end group coming back, one that's very experienced and has fought some battles. So I do like what Georgia has from a pass catcher standpoint. I mean, they don't have anybody like Ladden Brock, who I will point out in that 2023 season, I don't know that Georgia played more than 6 or 7 quarters with both of those guys healthy all year long. It was kind of staggered in and out with those guys being there. But they don't have that specific guy. But I love the depth of the group because Georgia has had some attrition at that spot in the past. And you look and there's size, there's speed, there's youth, there's playmaking ability. They check off a lot of boxes.
I'm going to step in for Ari because I know where he's going with this, because you didn't mention Zach Branch, and Ari
thank you.
can never let go of a 5-star recruit.
That's an omission on my part. I whiffed on the guy. Yeah.
Well, but that's the question, because Zach Branch, as a return guy at USC, was very dynamic. As a receiver at USC, was not so dynamic. So is that a case of just the situation he was in, or will that change now that he's in a new situation?
Well, I can tell you that they're really excited about him, and they're excited about the way he came in and worked and kind of set the tone. Listen, I'm not a big Lincoln Riley guy. Like I'm not a big beat up on Lincoln Riley guy, and I'm not a big like, hey, he's the best. I mean, there was a time when I thought that he was the best run game guy out there. Like I thought that, man, this guy can scheme it up better than anybody. And obviously his success with quarterbacks is kind of speaks for itself. But running a program, when I hear something like, hey, Zach Branch comes into Georgia, he's working really hard. He's already put on 8 pounds of muscle, and he's certainly a different player than we really thought he was going to be. Like he's actually a little bit of a physical presence out here, despite his shorter size. Like I kind of wonder what's going on. Like how does that happen? But he had a good spring game for Georgia, even despite being banged up. Wanted to play. I think he had a groin or a hamstring injury, one or the other. But wanted to compete in the G-Day game. Wanted to get out there and kind of get his feet wet, and had a big catch and did some good stuff. One of the reasons. Sometimes you think of slot receivers as a dime a dozen. Like that's kind of where you put your good receiver that's not great. But he is a guy that does bring some dynamics to that spot. Even with Dom Lovett being there last year and being a pretty good player, I think Zach Branch is just a different deal. And I'm interested to see how Georgia uses him, and really if he can catch the ball consistently, because Dylan Bell did it last year, Dom Lovett did it last year, and Arian Smith did it last year. And I know a lot of people will point, well, who was the receivers coach? It was James Coley. Brother, all of those guys, all 3 of them have had problems catching the ball in the past. That's just where Georgia's been. So I think they've done a good job of going out and getting more sure-handed dudes and guys that can catch it more consistently, because that was a big problem for them, especially in first halves of games.
I'm about to pass out, Andy. Like, just stop me from
stop Georgia up the rankings already.
Yeah, they're number 1 now. Yeah, if somebody was a 5-star, Jake, they're a 5-star forever in my head.
Okay,
it doesn't.
I see it. Yeah. And that's the expectation. I think. I mean, I think that Georgia fans are going to have that expectation too. They expect Zach Branch to come in here and generate touchdowns for them. They expect Zach Branch to come in here and generate explosives, catch and runs. And that's one of the reasons, we do a position week thing, or I do at Dawgs HQ, where I take each week position by position and I write, 5 stories. If it's a smaller group, only 4 stories, but I write 5 stories on each position. And I got to the receivers, and one of my bold predictions for the receivers was I think Zach Branch leads the team in touchdowns. And I think it's because he can get them running, he can get them catching it and running, he can get them by getting over the top. And Georgia loves to use those diminutive slot receivers, the quick and fast, but mainly quick down there to create separation types of guys to create touchdowns. And I think that's the kind of weapon he's going to be for Georgia. One of the reasons I didn't bring him up when I was talking receivers a minute ago is because I just kind of see him as an offensive weapon. Because of his return skills and things like that. I think you're going to see Georgia work really hard just to get him the football in easy ways so that they can kind of create some value at that position.
If he turns into being a jack of all trades touchdown generator, which I think is a good way to put it, but he is an explosive person that is going to score or change every game they play. I'm not being funny here. It changes my entire expectation of what Georgia's ceiling as a program is next year, or team is next year.
And one thing I'll talk about here that doesn't get a lot of attention, and it shouldn't. It's not that exciting. One thing Georgia does as well as anybody, and they've had a little bit of trouble doing it, especially over the last year and a half, is they create room for their punt returners. They create, I mean, like I saw Mecole Hardman, who wasn't the best in the world at catching it, all right, to begin with, but he also wasn't really a make the first guy miss type. But, man, they created room for him consistently. Mekhi Muse is another one, a former walk-on guy that ended up being a force for Georgia as a punt returner. You look down the line, they've had some guys that have done a really good job at the spot, and it's really been because of how hard they work to create. Urban Meyer used to do it both at Florida and Ohio State, kind of the way he treated special teams, and Kirby Smart tries to treat them the same way. I would expect there to be kind of a little bit of a renaissance for Zach Branch as a punt returner, because I know last year he kind of focused on kick returning as the season went on and actually got better as a kick returner and was less of an issue, less of a force at punt return. So, I know special teams aren't really excited, but I think that's an underrated way that Georgia's going to be able to create some hidden yardage.
Jake, how about the protection for Gunner Stockton? Because you mentioned it earlier in the show, Georgia's offensive line was banged up pretty much all last season. It was not a case where they would trot out the same 5 guys who were awesome. They had good players, but it was a lot of mix and match. How about this year?
Yeah, I saw where ESPN, someone posted on our board where they had a lineup consistency kind of rating, and every other team in the playoffs was 44th or better, and Georgia was 99. So that kind of nails home the injuries, and most of them, again, you talk about depth on the O-line. If you've got 9 offensive linemen you trust, I don't care who you are, you're feeling really good going into the season. Like every team in the country is feeling great with 9 offensive linemen. If you tell that team they're going to have 7 of those 9 get hurt, I mean, they're just going to have to grit and grin. I mean, that's all they can do. I mean, there's nothing else that they can get. I mean, you're not going to have 15 offensive linemen or 12 that are ready to play. You just can't get that many guys going at one time. And listen, if they have that many again this year, it's going to be worse because they don't have as much depth as they did last year. But I love the talent that they have at that spot. One of the things that's been kind of overlooked was Ernest Green, who was the left tackle in 2023 and did a phenomenal job, especially the last 3 quarters of the season. Just got started a little bit slow, had a tough game, I think, at Auburn, but then got better as the year went along. Then, last year was terrible at times, and he had multiple injuries, had a big time shoulder injury on his left arm that kind of kept him from playing left tackle effectively. I think he had like a soft tissue injury, lower body, hamstring, groin, something like that also kind of affected him. He moved to right tackle when he was coming back, and the move to right tackle was actually a little bit of a fit for him. I was told that, when he came back for the 2023 season, he was coming off a 2022 year where he spent the entire time kind of on the shelf after having a back surgery. So they were working hard to get him ready to play left tackle because they loved his talent. They never really got a chance to look at him at right tackle or for him to spend some time there and see how he fit. Well, he worked there all spring. He worked there for most of the season once he got healthy, and they shelved him and allowed him to get healthy, and he kind of fell in and he looked natural there. Monroe Freeling's more natural on the left side. So if those 2 guys, I mean, we're talking about 2 elite recruits. We're talking about 2 top 50 overall prospects there trying to get those spots nailed down. If Georgia nails it down with those 2, they've got a lot of experience and a lot of football IQ on the interior there. And as always, a lot of beef. They've got a lot of big bodies that can move guys off the ball, but I think it starts with those bookends.